Alright, welcome back guys. So I've just done an update to a video I already had, how to counter each killer on Dead by Daylight, and this now includes right up to patch notes 4.6.1, so includes the Trickster as well. So if you're struggling against killers, struggling playing survivors, want to know how you can beat these killers, then stay tuned. This guide is going to start off with the Trapper. He is the face of Dead by Daylight after all. You will know you're playing a Trapper when you see disarmed traps laid around the map. This will be the early clue that you need. I always find that with this killer you also notice if you're playing a good Trapper a severe lack of action at the beginning. Take notice of where he's been because it's very likely that area has been trapped. If you notice a chase has started early, then be safe in knowledge that the Trapper probably hasn't set up his network yet. How do you counter this killer? When you play against a Trapper, be very careful running through tall grass and dark areas because this is going to make it extremely difficult noticing his traps. A good Trapper will try to close off loops but not make things too obvious, so people generally get scared against pallets, but these locations will usually stand out quite a bit, but be very afraid of long grass near shacks and walls. A Trapper can close off loops, and again a good Trapper will do this mid-chase or maybe even fake putting a trap down. If you see this happening, bear in mind a Trapper can take 2.5 seconds to place a trap, so use that time to get your ass to the next loop. Next up is the Wraith. The Wraith is a stealth killer but has a lot of counters that you can use to your advantage or powers that will make you understand how to play against him. Early signs of playing the Wraith, he is a tricky one to detect, but I believe out of all the stealth killer you will get the most indications of who you are playing from this killer. The Wraith can be spotted from around 60 meters onwards with his shimmering, and also you can hear his footsteps and especially his snarling pretty early on. Other indicators include his wailing bell and the whoosh sound he makes when he goes into cloak mode. So how do you counter this killer? So you need to be alert at all times, as you should be when you are first playing. There are no telltale signs like how some of the other killers have, so you're relying on seeing or hearing him. You are sat repairing a gent and you see him or hear him approaching, you be careful. Firstly, the Wraith can block you in areas. Try not to get caught in areas where the Wraith can body block and get a free hit. The Wraith has an acceleration in speed when he uncloaks, so the key is to gain some distance when he is uncloaking. When he is uncloaking, the Wraith does have a slight slowdown, and just be careful at the tile you're at. The Wraith can also be slowed down with a flashlight, so when he is cloaked you can burn him out of it, which will not only bring him out of the cloak, but also temporarily stun him like a pallet stun for you to gain that much needed distance. The Wraith won't have his acceleration then either, so you can be safe in knowledge that you will have some more time to gain that much needed distance. A good Wraith might adopt the hit and run tactics, and this aim is to ensure that not only he takes you by surprise, but can take advantage through the perks and abilities to punish the people that stay injured. Constantly healing might not be the best tactic to employ when you have the generators to fix, but if you're not very confident, then you might want to make sure that you do not get took by surprise and hit once to go down. Next up we have the Hillbilly, and he is a killer who has a lethality with his one hit down chainsaw. So how do you spot a Billy first of all? Billy will make himself pretty known well in the game, so there will be no surprise when you hear his chainsaw revving around the map. Survivors might sometimes mistake a Billy for a bubba, but there is a little bit of a difference in the sounds you will hear. Billy also has great map pressure, so you can start the games early in chases. That's another telltale sign, as he will come to you pretty quickly. The best way to counter a Billy is to take advantage of windows, tiles and pallets to avoid getting down with one hit. If you are out in the open, then you are going to be in a spot of trouble, but look around for tiles that will give you that protection. When Billy misses, he has a few seconds recovery, so use that to your advantage throughout to gain distance. Pallet can be useful, but if Billy is mid-rev, then those pallets won't be around for long, so I always recommend using windows as the best option. You basically want to force Billy to hit you with a basic attack to ensure that he doesn't insta-down you with the chainsaw as a last resort. If you can minimise his chainsaw attacks, then you are well on your way to counter Billy and making the game that little bit more difficult for him. Next up we have the Nurse. The Nurse is the strongest killer in the game when in the right hands, and has very little counters due to her ability to completely ignore walls and pallets and distance she can get with her blinks. You can usually tell very early when you are playing against a nurse because the nurse's blinks make a loud screeching noise that will pretty much ensure you know that you're up against her. The key to countering nurse is to break line of sight as much as possible. If the nurse can see you, then you are in a world of trouble because of her movement speed when she is blinking. She is going to close down any distance you might have. Breaking line of sight will ensure that the nurse is relying on predictability to predict your movement rather than sight. Due to the nature of nurse players reacting on predictions, another counter is literally to be unpredictable. You break line of sight, so now be unpredictable with your movements to ensure the nurse has a hard time reading where you are going. Pathing that you might take with other killers is going to be known to the nurse, so you are going to be safe in the knowledge that the nurse is aware of pattern that you might take, so change that pattern. If you are out in the open and you can see the nurse's hand being held up, then she is blinking. If you can keep an eye on this might help you predict how far the nurse is going to blink. The longer she holds it up, the longer she's going to blink, and using techniques such as doubling back might actually work. Of course, the nurse can react to this by reducing the blink, but if timed right, you can get some good success out of it. So keep an eye on her fist. We move on now to Michael Myers, a stealth killer who, unfortunately if you're playing as, can be extremely slow to start, but once he gets going can be devastating to any team. Myers has very little indicators in the early game that he is the killer. The first indicator is usually when he has teed up from tier 1 and the Halloween music starts. To counter Myers, you must remember that he relies on the early game to build up momentum. Try not to group with survivors because that will only enhance an ability to tear up quickly. The best way to counter Myers is to starve him of stalk and put all the gem pressure on nice and early by being spread around the map. Myers in tier 1 has a slow speed, so ensure that you keep him in tier 1 as long as possible. Don't stand in front of him teabagging or waiting a pallet, however looping him will be easier until he pops into tier 2. Make sure that you starve him of stalk constantly by breaking his line of sight so he cannot get any stalk out of you. Once he is in tier 2, then that's it. You will hear his terror radius, although it will be a smaller radius than usual. If you hear him going to tier 3, then please remember he is going to be extremely quick, especially in vaults, so try to factor that in when you are trying to loop him. I see many people healing when Myers is in tier 3. This is pointless and you would be better off doing gens. All dependent on the add-on, Myers is usually in tier 3 for a standard amount of time, so if someone gets hooked, don't do anything stupid until you hear him tear down. If you see your colleague has time to chill in the hook before they drop the stage, and this is going to reduce his ability to snowball a whole team. We now move on to the Hag, another trap killer, and needs to set up a network to really utilise her powers. Like the Trapper, she will usually spend the early game trapping, but unlike the Trapper, she doesn't have any telltale signs to start with, so finding out it's a Hag early is pretty tricky. Usually my approach is to keep an eye on signs like the obsession being chased or any early hits, and if the killer is taking the time, it's usually someone AFK or a trap killer. Although I believe the Hag to be an extremely strong killer, there are some good counters to consider against her. Firstly, you can loop the Hag if needs be because she is a 110% speed killer, so it's going to be slow to catch you, so you can ensure you can waste a lot of her time getting her to engage in a chase. A good Hag, however, will place traps, so like the Trapper, she takes 2 seconds to place a trap, so if you see her placing a trap, then consider moving and gaining distance to another tile. Try to make note of where she has come from at the beginning of the game. Try to get an idea of where she spawned because that area will be likely trapped, and be careful around there as this is where her webber traps will be. Crouching over a trap will ensure that you don't set it off, so remember that if you see one or have an idea of that's where one is, whilst also being wary of unhooks, and you might want to approach them with caution. If you have a flashlight and aiming these at the traps will disarm it without allowing the Hag to teleport, so this will seriously remove some of her powers. If you can tell that the Hag is in chase and a safe distance away, then you can set off some of her traps. This killer is all about setup, so if you disrupt this, you are really destroying all the killer's hard work and making them get into a setup phase again. This will work particularly well if you know she's carrying a survivor, because she will lose her teleport ability until she hooks that said survivor. The last counter I would say would be to avoid the basement as much as possible. Once a Hag has survivors in there, then it's pretty much GG due to her traps. Next up we have the Doctor. The Doctor is a killer that can close off loops and shorten chases whilst having the ability to find survivors quickly. So how do you know you are up against the Doctor early on? There's not really much of a telltale sign here, however you will quickly establish when you hear survivors screaming that a Doctor could be the killer. It is sometimes easy to mix them up, the Doctor and the Clown, due to survivors screaming also from the tonic bottles. Another telltale sign is when he's using his static blast. You can usually hear that being charged up if you're within a certain area of him. To counter a Doctor, the main thing you need to do is treat him with respect when in chases. The Doctor has the ability to stop you temporarily from dropping pallets and vaulting, so be sure to keep checking what the Doctor is doing. I would recommend dropping pallets early to avoid being zapped with his shock therapy. If you are an unsafe pallet, then I would recommend just to keep looping. The Doctor does slow down when he uses his shock, so you might be able to prolong the chase. However, you don't want to be caught once you've vaulted with the shock therapy, because you will be trapped with the animation lock if the shock hits you after you've dropped the pallet, making it a nice easy hit for the Doctor. My final count of the Doctor would be in regards to his static blast. Generally you will hear the Doctor charging this up if you are within his terror radius. You can avoid giving away your position by just simply jumping into a locker, which will negate his power and not affect you. Next up we have the Huntress, a range attack killer using hatchets to injure or down the survivors. The Huntress has a unique terror radius sound. It's basically her humming a lullaby. This is very much prominent in most games in the early stages of the trial, and you will have no doubt of who you are playing. The Huntress is a range killer, so relies on hitting survivors with a hatchet. The Huntress relies on line of sight, so break this wherever possible will ensure that she cannot hit you with her hatchets. Looping the Huntress can be tricky because you are having to do a new strategy that you wouldn't use against most killers. Huntress players will first and foremost try to hit you with a hatchet because the cooldown of this attack is shorter, so you can loop a well due to a low speed, but also bait pallet drops to prolong the loop as much as possible. Standing at the pallet and then faking the drop and running will see most Huntress players stand still to hit you after the pallet drop, so losing some of their momentum. Always account for her hatchets when vaulting, so she doesn't have to be close, so take care when looping to ensure that you're breaking that line of sight too when you are vaulting. Use the tiles around you to your advantage, as objects around the map can take the hit if you duck well behind them. If you do take an M1 hit, then use the speed booster again, break a line of sight to ensure that she cannot follow up with a hatchet quick 1-2 down. If you are running away from a Huntress, then try to ensure you aren't running in straight lines and make your movement very unpredictable. Next up we have Bubba. He's our second chainsaw wielding killer in Dead by Daylight, and like Billy has both the M1 attack and the lethality of a one hit down chainsaw. His mechanics are different to Billy, with his ability to chain multiple chainsaw attacks consecutively to boost his speed and capture survivors with his chainsaw. Like Billy, playing against Bubba you will normally hear the chainsaw rev, and this is different to the Billy version. Like Billy, and I do say this a lot, the key is to avoid the chainsaw at all costs. Windows and pallets are the key to this, and to force the M1 rather than take the chainsaw hit. Remember that Bubba can chain his chainsaw attacks to increase the time it is revved, and he also benefits from a speed boost, so when looping, bear in mind that he will catch you if he has 3 available chains to put together. Stay away from the basement as much as possible, because once Bubba gets you in there you can pretty much guarantee it's a long way back from there due to his lethality with his chainsaw. When you are looping against Bubba, try to make sure there's a lot of debris, a lot of objects that he might be able to bang into. This is going to put him in a tantrum state and will buy you some time to escape. Finally, the last counter is to ensure that you don't group up too much against survivors. The Leatherface can chain multiple attacks, so if you are there with other survivors, he will have no problems mowing down 2, 3 or 4 survivors with a few sweeps of his chainsaw. Next up we have Freddy Krueger. He is a top killer in DBD and has plenty of abilities and powers to make your game increasingly difficult throughout. He has chase shortening ability and the ability to travel around the map with his teleport, making him almost a complete killer. It's very easy to spot that you are playing against a Freddy early doors, as you will have a timer next to the survivor's avatar highlighting how long you've got left to fall asleep. Freddy is pretty much the easiest killer to establish who you're playing against straight away for this reason. How do you counter the Freddy? So with Freddy, his powers are all geared around the survivors being asleep. He has the ability to slow you down with snares or catch you out with fake pallets, but only when you are asleep. While survivors are asleep, you also provide him with his dream projection quicker, so the key to playing Freddy is to try to stay awake as much as possible, and you can do this by locating alarm clocks to wake you up, or making sure other survivors who are awake wake you up. You can also miss a skill check, however I would use this as a last resort because this will send an alert to the killer on your location. Remember guys that waking up will negate all his powers and ensure that you basically play against a powerless killer, but be careful because every time you wake up, the next time you try to wake up, it will take longer and longer. It increases by 4 seconds each time and capped to a maximum of 16 seconds. The process will become more and more time consuming and delay you from doing your main objective. The next tip is in regards to his teleport. Survivors will generally see the blood start coming out of the generator and sprint away. It does take time for him to fully manifest and teleport, and usually he will come out facing away from a gen, so rather than sprint away, calmly walk to a safe location and keep your eye on the gen to make sure that Freddy isn't faking it. If he is faking it, then you can continue your work on the gen, but if he is completing the teleport, he won't have any scratch marks to follow, wasting a bit more of his time. Finally, playing against Freddy will require you to split up on gens. His power is to teleport to gens, but can only do this once before having a bit of a cooldown. So ensure that you're being efficient on gens will help you counter this strong killer. We are going to move on to the pig now. She is from the Saw chapter, and although she isn't the strongest killer, she does have some interesting abilities and powers such as stealth and ambush attacks to help her defeat the survivors. Another easy killer to figure out in the early parts of the trial, because you will see her jigsaw traps dotted around the map when loading in. Due to the jigsaw boxes being sporadically placed around the map, the likeness is you're going to know you're playing a pig straight away. So unlike against Myers and Ghostface for example, you will know you're up against a stealth killer, so be on guard and watch your surroundings to make sure she isn't sneaking up on you. The pig doesn't have the ability to grab you when in stealth, but coming out of stealth normally will give her a short time whilst the terror radius returns, so she can still grab survivors if you aren't alert. Listen for the sounds of her ambush attack. This is a charge attack that will see her increase her speed so can cover more distance for a short time too. Like I said though, this isn't a quiet attack and you will hear a roar before the attack, so as well as looking out for her, also use your ears. A good pig main will utilise an ambush attack at loop, so we'll try to mind game using this. This will ensure you can't see her, but I always recommend not engaging in this mind game. If the pig goes into stealth mode, she moves at a slow pace and has a short cooldown to come out of it. So if a pig tries to play these mind games, then the best form of action is to get distance and run to another loop, leaving her short on her ambush attack. If you are unfortunate enough to have a trap on your head, then you will have a certain amount of time to remove this. However, this timer only starts once the generator is completed. If a trap is placed after all the gens are completed, then you can still leave the trial as normal. However, if it's active, then you will need to either remove it or you will face certain death trying to leave the exit gates. If you do have an active trap, then you can leave via the hatch without dying. So if everyone has left, don't waste your time looking to remove it, find the hatch instead. Now let's take a look at the clown. He has been recently reworked and now has the ability not only to slow you down and end chases quicker, but also to speed himself and the survivors up too. The clown doesn't have many telltale signs in early game to identify who it is you're playing. I mentioned earlier with the doctor, the screams sometimes give it away, so if the survivors start screaming, this is either going to be a clown or a doctor. If you are lucky enough to see him across the map, then you will see the pink tonic to give away which killer you are playing. The clown has the ability to end chases early, so like the doctor, I would recommend utilising windows and pallets early. If you do run through the pink gas, then you will be slowed down by up to 15%, while you're also going to lose the ability to quick vault for 2 seconds, so remember this when looping this killer. The yellow tonic is going to give anyone who walks through it 10% extra speed, so if you do happen to have that near you and it's in your pattern, then go through that to gain that advantage. The advantage might not be long, as the clown will also gain that speed once he walks through it, but will keep you at an even level for a short while. Like all range attack killers, the key to avoiding the bottles is to be unpredictable. A clown will try to throw the bottle in your path, so faking one route to go another will certainly help you avoid the tonic, whilst also ensuring the clown uses up his bottles quickly. The clown does have a slowdown when refilling, so make him waste bottles because that is a good thing and negates his power. We are going to look at the Spirit. The Spirit is always touted in the top 2 killers in DBD, but regardless, she does have some counters when playing against her. The Spirit will make a sound when phasing in and out. The Spirit World, and this is the biggest telltale sign you will hear, to let you know you're facing this killer. The Spirit cannot see you when phasing, however she can hear you and see your movements. So for example, if you are running through grass or walking on some wooden boards, she is going to be able to hear that. She can also track you using your scratch marks. The main counter of this is to walk as much as possible and avoid areas that will give both a visual and audio cue to your location. Being unpredictable again will also help, so running away then walking in different directions might buy you some time in chases whilst also confusing this killer. Watch out for the fake phasing from a Spirit. I have lost count of the times that this works against survivors by simply standing still. You fool them to vault the pallet back to you or walk in your direction. So I would recommend at pallet waiting to see if it's fake or not. You can use a flashlight to try blind her, but if she is phasing, it's not going to work. If she's faking it, you are going to blind this killer. Doing this is a very risky strategy, but if it pulls off, then you are going to buy yourself more time. It goes without saying, don't do too much rush action when facing this killer. Unless you are running Iron Will, then please use opportunities to heal up, because running injured against a Spirit is pretty much game over because of her reliance on sound. Let's look at the Legion now. The Legion is a killer that relies on getting you and keeping you injured extremely quickly. So how do you know you're playing this killer, and what can you do to counter him? It is normally quite tricky to tell if you're playing a Legion until you either see him or you see the men bar on other survivors. The Legion's frenzy will ensure that he can go straight from that injure and mend to another, and this will normally alert you to know you're up against one of the Legion boys or girls. Like I advised, the Legion is going to get survivors injured extremely quickly and force them to mend, and with Feral Frenzy can do this to multiple survivors. A key to countering a Legion in a trial is to ensure that you're not spending too much time healing, because before you know it, he has his Feral Frenzy back and is applying the injured status to you and your teammates again. My advice would be, if you do carry a medkit or have self-care, then 99 your health state, and if you find yourself in trouble again, then you can quickly pop this if he's coming to you without his frenzy. Try not to group up too much with your fellow survivors, because once the Legion gets his first stab with the Feral Frenzy, going from survivor to survivor will be extremely easy to do if you are grouped. He is going to have the killer instinct on, so he's going to see your heart rate. However, what he won't be able to see is your scratch marks. It's sort of a give and take with that one. But again, be a bit unpredictable in your movements. However, be aware that he can hear your heartbeat and see it on screen where you are. Keep an eye on the status of your friends. If you see multiple mend actions on the bar, then you can be sure that the Legion is going to be heading your way if you are within range. A key counter to this is just to hold W and run and take up more of his or her time in catching you. It might not seem constructive, but it's certainly an effective way to waste his time. Final thing I would add to the Legion is that it's a bit of a gimmick, but it might work once in a while, is when the Legion is in frenzy, they have a longer lunge over pallets and windows. You can try to fake the run to the left or the right and wait for the lunge over the pallet or window, and then try to vault a pallet again, because he does leave that little bit of space for you. It's more than likely not going to get you that free chase escape, however it might be able to buy you a little bit of time. We move on to the Plague now. The Plague has a mixture of powers, including the range attack and also the ability to quickly snowball pressure and end the games if you're allowed to. It's nice and easy to know that you will be playing against the Plague, because as soon as you spawn on the map, you will see or hear her pools around the map, letting you know you're playing against this killer. The Plague relies on the survivors for her powers, and this is mainly through her pool. As standard, the Plague will usually start with one corrupted pool. The pools will become corrupted once survivors cleanse, so if you must cleanse, and try to be tactical about this and use the wells that might be further away, so the plague has to travel for her powers. If you are being chased, then normal rules apply with breaking the line of sight and ducking and using the tiles to your advantage to avoid the vomit. The plague can use her vomit to put you in the broken status, but this is done constantly over time rather than one time hit. If you are close to being broken and you can tell by your avatar on the side, then don't be afraid to take the M1 hit so you can at least get a sprint burst away to get to a safer location or to take her to another loop. If the plague has gotten her stronger vomit, you will hear the following audio cue. So play like how you would against other range killers, and remember, this is a time power. It's not going to be permanent, but it does ensure that you avoid her vomit as much as possible. If you know the plague has got her powers, then she can very well snowball this, as well as hit multiple targets to split up from the survivors to make her roll that little bit tricky. A nice little tip for you to know is when she has her corrupted powers, if you do manage to get her pallets done, that will get rid of her powers regardless of how much time she's got and putting her back into a normal state of just green vomit. On to the Ghostface now, another stealth killer on Dead by Daylight and another little tricky killer to counter. The Ghostface is a tricky killer to identify early in the game. You will generally be able to tell once you see a survivor with the Ghostface exposed timer on. Usually it's too late for that poor survivor, but you at least know what you're up against. The best thing for Ghostface is to keep checking your surrounds at all time, particularly check on walls and trees that he can peek round. I see lots of survivors trying to break Ghostface out, and if he is out in the open, then definitely go for that option. If you are standing staring at him though, make sure you can hear the breakout music, because otherwise your breakout is not registering and he can stalk at the same time, putting you in a danger of being exposed and ready to be one hit downed. If the Ghostface is behind a tree or peeking from a wall, his rate of stalk is double and you will struggle to break him out, as you need to see the majority of his body to be able to break him out easily. If he is peeking from there, don't waste your time, make sure you run to a safe distance. A good Ghostface player can sometimes 99% the stalk to make sure the next time they get you, they will only have to one tap for that stalk and catch you by surprise. If you think this has happened to you, then try to force the Ghostface to M1 you, and this will reset your stalk bar. Moving on to the Demogorgon now, from the Stranger Things chapter. Has a few powers that you need to contend with as a survivor. Usually the way you tell you're playing a demo is when he gets his first hit and you hear his screams come across the map. This is also the case when he's teleporting, although a good demo will not really use a teleport straight away. The Demogorgon relies on his portals to traverse around the map. Now listen to this part carefully. He only has a set number of portals, so if you are destroying any, then make sure these are the ones that could cause you problems in the future. If you see a portal near a repaired gen, leave it. There's no point actually destroying it because that's one less portal that a Demogorgon can place in a better location. Don't run in straight lines because a Demogorgon has a shred that you can use to catch up, and like a few other killers, if you plan on looping, then use the tiles to your advantage such as walls and objects. Account for the shred when vaulting and dropping pallets too. One final point about a Demogorgon is the fact that you don't want to give this bad boy height advantage. This Demogorgon can get insane distance using height advantage and his shred, so try to avoid these situations where possible. We have the Oni next, as a killer that relies on early game pressure and has the ability to destroy teams with ease through the snowballing of his power. There are no real early signs for the Oni unfortunately, but if you are on the other side of the map and you hear his power up, which will normally sound like this, then he has been in chase and gathered enough blood to start his powers. The Oni can only get his powers when injuring survivors, and the longer you can starve him with these powers, the better. Before he has his powers, he's just a big standard M1 killer, so try to keep him like that for a while. If you are injured and find yourself in a position to heal, then do so as quickly as possible. Injured survivors will leave blood orbs around the map that not only help him gain his powers, but useful for the Oni to track you down. If the Oni already has his powers, then please don't waste time and heal just yet until he loses this, as he is going to have one hit down anyway, so either way you're vulnerable. I have said it for a few killers and the same applies for the Oni, that splitting up is a good strategy. You don't want the Oni to get multiple injuries in one location because he's going to gain enough powers and destroy the team with one power up. Keep your distance if you hear the power up and realise that this is only temporary. If the only does pick up a survivor, then he loses his powers until he refills it again. Until then, play safe. Deathslinger is the next killer we look at, the cowboy with a harpoon gun to reload survivors back in from a distance. Early signs you're playing a Deathslinger is the sound of the shooting of his gun. You hear that early on and also see the mending icon next to the survivor's name. There is no doubt of who you are playing. Like all range killers, the best tip is to avoid line of sight so he can't hurt you with his harpoon gun, so use the tiles to your advantage. If you are shot, then try to use objects to get in between you and the Deathslinger. This is normally extremely good with pallets, so dropping the pallet before the shot will protect you and give you the deep wound status, provided it's a safe pallet. Remember, the Deathslinger is a slow killer with 110% speed, so use it to your advantage when looping. If he misses a shot, then make sure you use this to your advantage, as the Deathslinger will have a reload time to reload his gun, so use that time to gain distance. Pyramid Head is the next killer we look at. He was drafted in from a Silent Hill franchise. Unfortunately, there isn't really any way to distinguish you are playing a Pyramid Head until you hear his terror radius music or physically see him. Like I explained, the Pyramid Head has both a range and basic attack, although his range attack is very limited in distance. Some of the counters to his ability: firstly, a good Pyramid Head will try to hit you with the range attacks whilst looping, so once you break line of sight, don't be afraid to do unpredictable things like doubling back to avoid his range hit. I would recommend with the Pyramid Head to try to complete loops shorter than you would with other killers. Ensure you're moving on to the next tile without overcommitting to an area. The Pyramid Head will lay down trails across the map, and if you see these, then please crouch through them to avoid being tormented. If you're tormented, then the Pyramid Head can send you to his cages or more of you if you're on your last hook. Running and walking through these trails is also going to send the killer an alert through Killer Instinct, giving away your position on the map. Blight is the speedy killer from chapter 17 and has the ability to close down distance extremely quickly with his powers. Not really much can be explained about early games with this killer, because the fact is the killer's going to make himself known only once you're in his terror radius. The Blight relies on his speed to close down distance and getting the 2 required hits quickly to get that pressure going. First tip would be to use the tiles to your advantage. The Blight relies on getting rush hits after bouncing off an object, so if you can be in a busy area, this is certainly going to make it a little bit tricky for him to get that hit. If you do get hit and running away in the injured state, then try to break that line of sight again to make a killer have to predict your movements and your whereabouts. Try to stay out of dead zones as much as possible. If you have the speed boost off a hit, then make sure your next stop is a tile where you can loop. Although I hear people recommending going to dead zones due to lack of places of the Blight bouncing off for his lethal rush, there will still be trees and rocks for him to utilise, and you can pretty much have nothing there for protection. The twins have a very good telltale sign when starting, but that is only once Victor is basically released. You will hear the sound of him coming out to play, letting you know that you are playing the twins. This killer has a few counters that should help you when playing against him. If you hear Victor release, then keep a listen out for his sounds to hear him approaching. He's not going to have a terror radius, but you can hear him coming. Use tiles again to avoid his lunge. Objects, windows and pallets are good things to make them a little bit harder for Victor. If you are aware of where Charlotte is, then try to keep the action as far away from her as possible. That's if Victor's out. Although Victor can injure and down survivors, the killer will have to switch to Charlotte if they want to take you to a hook. I have seen this done very effectively by survivors against this killer, and that is running in twos with another survivor acting as a protector. What this did was ensure that Victor would be quickly disposed of whilst healing was done before Charlotte would come over. So maybe consider being another survivor's buddy for the trial to get to the gens quicker and negate one of Charlotte's only powers in Victor. And finally, we have the latest killer on the block, the Trickster. Unfortunately, there is no early telltale sign that you're playing against this killer, and you're only going to know when you come into his terror radius. And once he's found you, there is a few things though that you can do to counter this killer. Firstly, you must try wherever possible to stay out of open space. Open space to this killer will allow him to get his hits easily to damage your health or get it down. Breaking line of sight wherever possible is essential too. The killer, like many range killers, has to have line of sight to cause damage. Utilise the tiles and objects to make this difficult for him to get you with his blades. One note to also remember is the Trickster does lose speed when he has his blades ready, so use this to your advantage. Taking away the Trickster's ability to use blades will leave you with an M1 110% killer, which tips the odds in your favour. Finally, if you have managed to break chase with this killer, use stealth to allow your decay meter to recover. This is going to start recovering once the chase is dropped, and you will see the meter start to decrease, allowing you the breathing space to start the recovery. And that's it for the guide, guys. So hope you enjoyed it, hope you get a lot out of it. If you did, or if you think I forgot something, please drop me a comment, let me know. I'll pin it, and we can also update anybody else that comes across this video. If you enjoyed the video, guys, please consider giving it a like. And if you do enjoy my content, I do have other guides, killer guides, survivor guides, then please remember to press that subscribe button. And if you do, click that notification bell and it will update you when I release any more new videos. Alright, thanks guys.